Good afternoon. Welcome to the special council meeting for April 5th, 2021. This meeting is being conducted in accordance with emergency directives from Governor Sisolak. There's limited in-person attendance for the meeting today. Public comment may have been submitted prior to the meeting via email or voicemail. We will have a public comment period at the beginning and end as usual, where people may call in for the comments they would like to make. Items listed on the agenda may be taken out of order. Two or more items for consideration may be combined, and any item on the agenda may be removed or related discussion may be delayed at any time. With that, I will call the meeting to order, and we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll now open our initial public comment period. Public comment during this time must be related to items on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 5 minutes in length, and as always, we ask that you be civil and concise with your comments. The phone number to call is 702-589-9629. This is the initial public comment period for the special council meeting regarding interviews of city attorney candidates. The phone number to call is 702-589-9629. Madam City Clerk, you'd indicated there were some written comments submitted.
Yes, I'll go ahead.
Thank you.
The first public comment was submitted by Joseph Purdy. Mayor and City Council, my name is Joseph Purdy. I have lived in Boulder since 1993. My wife Joan and I have raised 3 children in Boulder. I am also a full-time attorney and have been licensed in Nevada since 1987. Please allow this email to give the highest recommendation to an applicant for the city attorney position, Mr. Stephen F. Smith. I have known Mr. Smith since the 1990s when we began working on cases together. At that time, he was an excellent attorney for Nevada Power Company. We defended serious personal injury cases together. I was so impressed with Mr. Smith that I hired him in my law office, where I was the managing attorney in a staff counsel operation for an auto insurer company. Stephen exceeded my expectations and was diligent in his work. He came from the public sector, a state agency, and returned to the public sector as the general counsel for the health district. He served as a court-appointed arbitrator and short-term trial judge, among many other judicial-like positions. He is very capable and experienced. He is a lawyer's lawyer. I know him to be of good character. I know that he is genuinely interested in becoming the city attorney and will make an outstanding city attorney. He is well-versed in legal issues affecting Boulder. He has the most experience of the candidates for the position. I highly recommend him. Please feel free to call me. Joseph Purdy. The next is from Joseph Kraniak. Dear Madam City Clerk, please read my comments during the initial public comments portion of today's City Council meeting. Allow me to voice my support for the appointment of Christy Kendall as City Attorney. Mrs. Kendall is the only candidate who has actually held the position of City Attorney. Mrs. Kendall is also the only candidate with liability pool management experience on both the administrative and litigation sides. As important as to what Mrs. Kendall has is what she does not have: pre-existing ties to any faction in City Hall or the community. I am confident that if appointed, Mrs. Kendall will remain on the moral high ground and follow the legislative intent behind NRS 281A, Ethics in Government, that a public office is a public trust and shall be held for the sole benefit of the people. The last two permanent city attorneys, David Olson and Stephen Morris, played favorites, played the law, and played the community. NRS 41.0385 requires the city attorney to prepare annual reports listing all the claims against the city, outstanding and resolved for the previous calendar year, and to file them with the city clerk office by the 1st of February each year. Olson and Morris credit the preparation of the reports they filed to the city's liability insurer, the Pool Pact. The problem with the reports is that they omit any mention of the claims the Pool Pact handled on the city's behalf. If cronyism were an Olympic sport, Olson would have taken the gold in 2012. That was the year that his son, Brian Olson, filed a civil rights lawsuit against the Boulder City and Henderson police departments. A wrongful death action was filed in district court against the city and the operators of the BCMX track. The Southern Nevada Confederation of Clubs filed their lawsuit within days of the ends of the Mongols National Meeting in June of that year, and later amended the complaint to include 2 members of the Boulder City Police Department as defendants. Olson filed no claims report for 2012 and never mentioned these cases in the claims reports he filed afterwards. In 2014, Dave Olson was outed for trying to make a fast buck by acting as the expert witness in his son's lawsuit. What Olson earned was a stipulated agreement to a willful violation from the Commission on Ethics. The 2 officers were dismissed from the Confederation of Clubs lawsuit in March of 2015. The wrongful death case was settled in 2016 for $375,000. It would be interesting to know what portion of that settlement ended up being paid by the Pool Pact on the city's behalf. There has been problems with nepotism in the past, which is why a community voted to amend the city charter to prohibit the practice. Section 8, paragraph 1, subparagraph D reads as follows: No person shall be appointed as a city officer who is a grandparent, parent, uncle, aunt, brother, sister, nephew, niece, child, or grandchild by birth, marriage, or adoption of a city officer, employee, or council member at the time of appointment. According to city personnel records, Tyson Morris, Stephen Morris's son, was employed as a part-time water safety instructor lifeguard from 4/25/2016 through 6/2/2018. In prohibiting nepotism, the charter makes no distinction between full and part-time city employees, and there is no distinction to be made between the acting and permanent appointments of city officers, as both are for indefinite periods. If one applies the charter, given the customary meaning to the words at issue, it appears that Stephen Morris was ineligible not only for appointment as the permanent city attorney on 2/27/2018, but also ineligible for appointment as acting city attorney on 6/27/2017. The information I reference is a matter of public record in one form or another. Most of the record should be available for asking from the city clerk. If the community had a better idea of what had been going on in City Hall, there would likely be less of it going on in the future. Having the facts is useful, but it is no substitute for having people of integrity appointed to serve as city officers. Absent integrity, there is no transparency. Absent transparency, there is no accountability. Old habits, especially old habits, die hard. Christy Kendall is the person the community needs now to start with the process of draining the swamp that has formed around City Hall. I expect that Mrs. Kendall will be more than an equal to the task of subduing any alligators that get in the way. Joseph Kraniak III.
Thank you. Again, this is our initial public comment period. Anyone wishing to speak, the phone line is available. The number is 702-589-9629. Hearing no others for public comment, we will close the initial public comment period and move to the first item on the agenda. Mr. Bolt.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm Bryce Bolt, Administrative Services Director. You have before you this afternoon for possible action be matters pertaining to the City Attorney. We have 3 candidates today for interviews. We're getting on the phone right now Sarah McKee from Gov HR USA to help facilitate this process. First up will be Christy Kendall, and then Stephen Smith, and then Brittany Walker. And I'll shuffle them in and out of here for you. And I'll let Sarah take it away now with regard to the process.
Sarah, can you hear okay?
I can, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. So just kind of a recap, we met with council on March the 23rd. At that point, you narrowed a candidate list to 5 candidates. Since that time, obviously they've been invited to present before you to answer questions. We've had 2 candidates withdraw. That was candidate Patchett and candidate Megan Smith. And so today we have the remaining 3 candidates for you to interview. As we've kind of stated in the questions that we put before you, it's important that you ask each candidate the same question. Obviously, there will be times when you may have a follow-up question, and we certainly encourage that. We want you to be able to get all of your questions answered and have a thorough understanding of what the candidate means when they're answering those questions. And so just be sure that, if you don't quite understand what they're trying to get across to you, just be sure and speak up and ask that question again or ask it in a different way. So the questions we've laid out before you have who will be asking those. And so we'll just go around the room that way. And anybody has any questions before we get started?
Questions or comments from council? Councilmember Folda?
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Vicki, could you explain how these questions came about? So I think, we had some general ones proposed and then some council members submitted some. Can you kind of explain that process before we start?
Yeah, so every council member submitted at least a few questions, some more than others, and several of the council members submitted questions that were, if not exact, pretty close to one another. And so we've tried to put those into areas where you would be able to ask them today, and hopefully provide a question in a form that they will be able to provide an example to you as well. And so that's where most of, other than I think the first general question, all of the questions were submitted by a council member.
Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Adams?
I guess like to comment just so, for transparency's sake, the questions, it seems like it's kind of a round robin here where we kind of each one will be asking a question, and it doesn't necessarily look as though there's necessarily that these were the questions submitted by the person asking the question. Is more so it seems to just kind of space out the questions evenly. So I just wanted to make that known that, I'm just looking at the questions here that before me, and they're not necessarily the questions I asked. Not that I'm not interested in the questions. I just wanted to be clear that's, it's not necessarily a one-for-one here, just for full transparency's sake.
Well, I think what you're getting at is the person asking the question is not necessarily the person who submitted the question.
Correct, yes.
Okay? Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, just for clarity's sake, number 13 and 14 are both asked by Hoskins. I'm assuming that I should be coming after the mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was there a mistake on there?
Yeah, I
thought
just
had an
wanted
order.
I didn't want to ask the question and have it be a misunderstanding. I figured I'd address it early. Yeah, questions number 13 and 14 both say Councilwoman Hoskins.
I apologize. Yes, one of those should say Councilwoman Bridges.
Okay, I'll ask 13. That seems to be the order that we're going.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Hoskins?
I was just going to ask, are we going to change it? Am I asking 13 and Councilwoman Bridges is asking 14?
You want to do it that way?
If that's all right with you. Sure. I brought that up that I saw I had 2 questions, but okay, you take 14, I'll take 13. Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Mr. Bolt?
I'd like to introduce Christy Kendall to answer all your questions.
Hello,
Welcome,
good
Ms.
afternoon.
Kendall.
Oh my, that's very. Hi.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with what's going to, the process here. Ms. McKee, we now have Ms. Kendall here. Would you like to go over the process, or have you done so previously?
I think they have an understanding. The council members will each have some questions that they're going to ask, and then you'll have a chance at the end to ask any questions you might have. And we just ask that the mayor and council members introduce themselves to her.
All right. I'm Mayor McManus.
Councilmember James Adams.
I'm Councilwoman Claudia Bridges.
Councilmember Hopkins.
Councilwoman Folda. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
All right. I guess we will begin with our questions then. Councilmember Adams?
Yes, thank you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you were interested in our city attorney position at this point in your career.
Well, I am a small town kid from Nevada way back when. I went to junior high in Tonopah, Nevada. I went to high school in Hawthorne, Nevada, Mineral County High School. UNR grad, which I kind of whisper when I'm down south there. And I'm so old that Nevada did not have a law school when I went to law school, so I was forced to go out of state. I started my career in public service with a city attorney's office in Sparks, Nevada, which is a charter city, and a very old city too, because it started, I think it incorporated in 1905. I was there for several years, 8, I think. And I went on to, in Sparks, if you want to be a city attorney, you have to run an election against your boss, which I did not want to do. So I moved to Mesquite, Nevada, where I became the city attorney there. I was the only attorney in the city, no other attorney, so I was responsible for all the legal advice to boards and commissions. I did that for a couple of years and then went into private practice with a firm that actually did municipal law work through Pool Pact. So I stayed in the municipal law area, and now I'm working out in Nye County, assigned to both the civil and the criminal division. I think Boulder City is an amazing city. You guys have 13 candidates running for your current election, which is wonderful. You have a very involved citizenry, which I really appreciate. The town is beautiful. My husband and I hope to retire here. And I think, and I know in these interviews you're supposed to be very humble, and but I think I bring a lot to the table, and I think as Boulder City deserves the absolute best candidate for this position, and I'm here to tell you today that I really believe I'm that candidate.
Thank you.
Thank you. What do you consider to be the primary responsibilities of the city attorney position, and how has your career prepared you to assume the duties of the city attorney position?
Well, the primary duties of the city attorney are not policy. Let's start with that. City attorney, if the city council or the commission says, we're going to man a mission to Mars, great. That's not my job to say whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. I see my job more like sort of the bumpers they put up in pool hall or bowling alleys. My job is to keep you in the lanes, is keep you legal, keep you doing what you're supposed to do, but no policy whatsoever. And I've prepared for that my whole career. I started off in Sparks. In Sparks, we considered the different departments clients. So you were, and I'm sorry, I'm fogging up my glasses a little bit here with the mask. In Sparks, you had, so I represented risk management, human resources, the fire department, finance, police. And so there were a ton of issues that arose where, again, we weren't setting the policy, but we were letting them know how to stay within the bounds of what is legal, how you do this legally. I always tell my clients, if you hear me saying, no a lot, we need to step back and reassess what we're doing. Because if I'm saying no, what I really mean is, no, we got to do it another way. But again, mine is just to keep you guys right here. Whatever the policy is, that's what you were elected for, and that's who you represent, is the voters and what they want. I'm just how we get there.
Thank you. Councilmember Bridges?
Yes, thank you. You are concerned that an agenda item or a discussion during a council meeting is off track in terms of possible open meeting law or NRS. How do you communicate that concern to members of council?
Well, I prefer to give most of the legal advice prior to the meeting. So if it's something that we can see ahead of the meeting, if it's an agenda item that we know is sort of a hot topic or is likely to wander, which happens, hopefully we can talk about that before, about, you know, this is where we have to keep it. Again, those lanes, this is where we have to keep it. I have had to stop meetings before. Unfortunately, the one that comes to mind is someone got a little personal and started making personal attacks during a public comment on an agenda item. And I just hit my button and said, you know, to the chairman, may I have the floor? And I said, I think we're getting a little far afield. Personal attacks are certainly not allowed pursuant to our rules, which is on the agenda in Nye County. And we just moved on from there. But there's a way to do it very, very nicely, but firmly, so that everything, again, stays right in that lane where we're legal.
Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes. What process or procedures would you follow in communicating with the city council, the city manager, and the city staff? And how would you keep them informed and avoid surprises on current or ongoing issues?
Well, there's always surprises, unfortunately. So you try to minimize those by being as informed as you can be. This happens to be a legislative year. So I am attending weekly legislative meetings, and I'm staying apprised of the bill drafts that are coming forward, things that are moving through committee and where those are, things that have been put aside. I believe in transparency and sort of that open door policy. I believe that you can communicate via, memos. It's sort of what the council wants, with the understanding that everyone sort of communicates differently. Some people prefer telephone calls. I've heard some people prefer text messages. Some people just want to see your memo and never see your face. And you just kind of have to learn what the council likes the best and still get all that information to them, which is very important, because especially now in a legislative year, things are changing very rapidly, and we're kind of all on this holding pattern where we're waiting to see what the final bills are going to be, because we know as soon as those hit, we're going to have a lot of things that we have to address come January 1 of 2022, and in July 1st. So, but I think it's very important. Email, memos, reports. In Mesquite, we had the city attorney actually made a report at public meetings, and then we had breakfasts where the residents could come in, and myself and the city manager used to attend those breakfasts so that the people could ask us directly. Now that's a little tricky. The city manager liked it more than me, because as city attorney, my job is to give advice to the board or to the city and not to individual residents. So it was a little trickier for me, but I liked attending. We could clarify a lot of misinformation by doing that.
Thank you very much.
Councilmember Folda?
Thank you. If faced with a situation where a resident brings a complaint against a council member where they believe something unethical or perhaps illegal has been done by that council member, how would you handle that situation?
If they believe it's been illegal, then it's necessary to direct them to the police department to file a report, or depending on the type of allegation it is, get them to the correct regulatory agency. It's also important to remember that there is a presumption of innocence for anyone, and that we can't proceed as if we're going to hang somebody out in the walkway here. I think it's very important to get to the right people, and we have a lot of agencies that actually help small towns when we run into this kind of problem. Because of course, if I am appointed, then I'm appointed by this board, and there's an appearance that, I would have to say there was no violation or no crime because I was appointed and in order to keep my job. So it's important to avoid that appearance of impropriety by getting the correct people involved. And the state offers a lot of help in that area. And I'm very familiar with state agencies that we work with. What comes to mind is in Mesquite, one time I had a situation where I needed the help of the county, and I called Clark County and said, I'm in Mesquite, I'm the only attorney here, we've had this situation arise, I actually need some help. And then I got transferred to 3 different people that I had to explain very carefully to that Mesquite was part of Clark County. That was also very frustrating, but necessary because, again, I was appointed there as well. And to avoid that appearance of impropriety, make sure there are correct people. And then also, it's important, even though that we are public servants and we're on the public stage, that you still have to be very careful about any leaks. You want to maintain as much confidentiality as possible if it's a personnel issue, even if it's a public official, because those types of things, we've all seen it, that the headline, the accusation is on page 1 and the retraction is on page 7, and that's not very fair. So it's very important from the start of it, to be as transparent as you can be while still getting it into the hands of the right people.
Councilmember Adams?
All right. Please define the following words or phrases: property takings, public use, and just compensation with regard to governmental processes.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the second one?
Public use.
Just use. Well, all of those together, it sounds like you're talking about eminent domain, because those are the 3 things you have to have for eminent domain. Is a taking of a property for a public use, and you have to just justly compensate the person for the property. Now, what's very interesting about this is on March 22nd, the U.S. Supreme Court just heard a case, I'll get it wrong. Cedar Point, that's it. Cedar Point Nursery. And we're waiting for a decision from Cedar Point Nursery to come down, which may affect the definitions of those. Because in that case, they took an easement, which they did not compensate for. And the U.S. Supreme Court right now is making a decision on whether or not that is going to violate the Fifth Amendment and the Takings Clause. But public use, the way it's been defined in the past, is typically for waterways, for electricity, for public buildings that serve the community as a whole. And then the just compensation they define differently depending, but usually fair market value for the property.
I have a long one. Does the process used for the creation of the charter differ from the creation of other municipalities in Nevada? If there are differences, do the differences provide any advantages or disadvantages to the viability of the city charter? The legislative climate regarding local government is changing in Nevada and other states. How has it changed from your perspective, and what do you think municipalities need to do to be successful in this changed environment?
Right up until the end there, I was going to say yes. No, it does differ. Charters are special legislation that has to be passed by the legislature. Sparks, that I worked for, was a charter city. Boulder City is a charter city. I actually helped lay some foundation for Mesquite, which did not become a charter city until 2017. But I like to think I laid some work for that. So having special legislation is nice because if you are just a general law city, every other year when the legislature goes into session, they can make these laws based on one or two cities, general law cities that are having an issue, and they create either an unfunded mandate or some other difficulties for other general law cities because they're trying to correct for this, and it just, everybody has to live by it. So I like charters, I like charter cities because it's special legislation, and therefore it's usually controlling over anything else, anything that conflicts with it. I don't know, I tend to like charters, maybe that's my bias because I've always worked for charter cities. You talked about the differences. The difference is in how it's made, the special legislation versus the general law where they can come in and you're really at the mercy of the legislature. Now, the difficulties in that is it can be hard to change your charter. You have to go through a very particular set of votes and how to do that. With the citizenry on how to change your charter. And if you actually have something in the charter that you don't like, it can be very difficult to get that out of the charter as well if you have something that's not working. So that can be the downside to having a charter. I do think that as we move forward, we're seeing the state, and last year really made it apparent that the state is sort of pushing more of those responsibilities down to the municipalities. I've always said that municipalities are first responders. No matter what happens, it's going to take a few days for FEMA to get here or for the feds to get here or for anyone. Everyone's going to be looking right here at City Hall for what do we do in the event of an emergency. And so I think it's difficult for cities to sometimes have to do what the legislature is telling them in a way that works for them. We're all kind of dealing with, on the criminal side of things, the Nevada Supreme Court's decision in Valdez-Jimenez has had some unintended consequences on cities and the jails and how we keep people in or out based on their bail status. Which has been difficult, but I think cities are doing more and more all the time, and I think that's because, like I said, cities are the first responders. Just period. You just are, whether you want to be or not. You are.
Among chartered cities in Nevada, is there anything different about Boulder City that you're aware of?
Boulder City has, in its charter, you have a lot of land use in your charter. Well, there's no gaming per your charter in Boulder City. Also, to expend from your or your capital improvement fund, that is in your charter, which I believe is different than some of the charter cities I've seen anyway. And then the way in which you can dispose of and advertise land is actually written into your charter.
Thank you. Councilmember Bridges?
Thank you. Okay, the city charter contains provisions for initiatives and referendums by citizens to adopt or repeal city ordinances. The charter further prohibits the city council from amending or repealing any ordinances approved or adopted by the voters. Are you aware of any city charter, state constitution, or U.S. Constitution provisions that would remove the prohibition of the city council to amend or repeal ordinances approved by the voters?
Thoughtful pauses, you'll get used to them from me. I am not presently aware of any U.S. ones that would do that. Approved by voters. If the charter allows for referendums and voters to make changes, to me it would be logical that then the voters could make the change, but not the council if at a later date they decided to do that. But as I stand here today, I couldn't tell you.
Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes, thank you. If you were elected or selected, tell us what you would tackle during the first 90 days in the position and why you would tackle that.
Well, I understand that Boulder City has had sort of a history of, you've sort of been through the ringer lately. I started my career out in Sparks, the Sparks City Attorney's Office. The very first cases I worked on were cases that were brought by current and former employees, federal cases, litigation cases. I know that Boulder City is going through some of that as well. The best lawsuit is a lawsuit that never happens. So I would want to evaluate the training that's being done. In my former positions, I actually created training and was actually allowed to implement some of that training to managers and departments. In every position I've ever held, I've gone to the department heads. I've done ride-alongs, like with the fire department, the police department, tried to talk to not only the directors of those departments, but some of the, what I would call worker bees of the department, to really see where they're at and what their legal needs are. Because I think you need to get a good feel for that before you know, I've already said, I really believe I'm the best candidate for this job, but that doesn't mean I'm going to come in here and say, okay, here's exactly what you need to do, because I don't know exactly what you need to do, or some of the things that you already have in place that are being done. I think I can add to those, and that's what would be important. So I would spend the first 90 days getting to know all the resources that I have available to me in the city, getting to know the people in the city as my clients, and each one of their unique legal needs.
Thank you.
Councilmember Foley?
Thank you. How do you see the city attorney's role in relation to the city council, the residents, and the city staff?
I see the city attorney as a legal advisor to the city and to you as a ward. I've actually had to tell residents on the phone in other jurisdictions that, no, I don't represent you, even though they live in the city. I've had people call and say, well, I live in the city and you're the city attorney, so you need to represent me. However, I do think it's important to be, again, as transparent as possible about, I'm used to having, in Sparks, we had our legal opinions that we would write online. So anyone could go online and actually read the opinion and see logically and legally how we came to the conclusion that we came to. So there was a lot of oversight by that. As I've said, I tend to think of the departments as my clients. I can't do their jobs. I don't know their jobs, and I can't do them as well as they can. But I can certainly help them through training or through other legal means to get done what they need to get done. It's kind of a high wire act.
Councilmember Adams?
What do you consider to be a professional weakness, and what have you done to try and improve on that weakness?
I have a theory that there are certain things that are just innate in us as humans from the time that we were born. After my mother passed, I was given the contents of a hope chest she had, and in it, it had an award that I had won when I was in the first grade. And it was called the I Have to Get It Done Now Award. And I think that has stayed with me my whole life. If I am going to do something, I want to get it done now. And I have had to learn to slow down, to embrace the process. Things take time, and sometimes you have a much better result when you slow down and you get more input from more stakeholders. But I tend to be like if we're going to do it, let's do it now. Let's go. Let's get it done. You know, Christy, it's going to take a month. Okay. But I've learned to embrace that. I hope. It's not perfect, but I've learned to embrace it. But it's not even one of those weaknesses. It's secretly a strength. It's just, I like to get things done now.
How would you define the term public service, and what is your opinion on whether the city attorney is a public servant?
I think absolutely the city attorney is a public servant. Absolutely. And I think the public service is sort of the rent that we pay for the position that we hold. None of us are going to be in these seats that we hold forever. And so it's very important that the time that you're there, you're serving the public to the best of your ability, that you're serving the public in a way that is consistent, that is ethical, and even that you're thinking about the time when you're not going to be there, that you're thinking about succession planning, and you're thinking about everything you do builds trust with or destroys trust with people. So you have to constantly be wanting to build that trust with the public. So absolutely, the city attorney is a public servant, absolutely.
Councilmember Hoskins.
Thank you. There are times that a novel legal issue with opposing legal options with no prior precedents faces a city. How would you approach an issue such as this to ensure the city is best protected and that it proceeds in an appropriate manner?
Well, I have had the pleasure of redrafting the brothel ordinances in my county. So that is a very unique issue that not a lot of other counties have faced or issues that anyone has dealt with. A lot of those come down to risk-benefit analysis. Like I said, I've previously represented old cities and newer cities and risk management. And really at that point, you're giving your board or commission all the legal options and then discussing with them the risk benefit. This one more likely leads to a lawsuit because of X, Y, or Z. The result of that lawsuit may be we win and we set that precedent for future. What are the odds of that? Let's talk about it. Maybe it's this decision over here where we do this and it creates less of a problem, if you will. But typically, there will be a clear winner when you really sit down and do the risk benefit analysis of what wants to be done. And keep in mind, again, the policy of which way to do it. If I'm presenting two legal options and I'm saying these are both legal, you can do, one is maybe riskier than the other, whichever one the board chooses, that is a policy decision. That is not for me to weigh in on. That is absolutely a policy decision. But you can certainly look to a lot of, all the things that we do as lawyers, look to similar issues, that we can make sort of those analogies to, work with your administrators. I'm part of a fantastic organization called International Municipal Lawyers Association. And there are just thousands of municipal lawyers across the United States and Canada, and likely one of them has seen this issue before. So they're a great resource to reach out to when you have this kind of issue. But again, keeping in mind, my job would be to present the legal options. Your job is to decide the policy.
Thank you.
Councilmember Bridges?
Okay. It is well known that Boulder City has a controlled growth ordinance. What is your opinion on how legally sound it is? And if you believe it is not, why?
I wouldn't say that I have an opinion on whether it's legally sound or not. I think it is legally vulnerable. So whether it's legal or not, yes, cities have controlled growth in Nevada for years. However, in this particular instance, your growth ordinance is vulnerable because it is not included in your charter, as I recall. Your charter talks about controlled growth, but the actual ordinance is just an ordinance. So without having more information, I think that it might be legally vulnerable. Because if you got a new board and commission in, and without knowing, as I stand here today, the history of whether that was something that was passed by the voters, and could the voters change that, that may be a problem. But in terms of, can you control growth? Absolutely.
Councilmember Folda?
Thank you. The city attorney has a lot of spinning plates at any given time, and typically each council meeting will lend another spinning plate. What do you do to stay organized, and how do you prioritize to keep from dropping one of those plates?
I think it's very important to constantly communicate with the board about their priorities, and so that they have the understanding, okay, if you're adding this, then I got to move one of these other things. It either has to become less of a priority, it has to become a later priority, or you need to give me the time to get this done real fast so then I can add this to it. And I think organization is the key to that. Communication is the key to that. And those priorities change constantly. It's something that I'm very used to, given the jobs that I've held. They do change constantly. I'm sure, just like you're aware, that suddenly something becomes more emergent and this is less emergent, but you kind of just have to constantly communicate so that somebody doesn't, well, I thought you were going to finish that before you finish this. You need to have those talks about what is the absolute priority in which order. And if those change every 15 minutes, they change every 15 minutes. But at least you have a plan, so you know when the plan's gone horribly wrong.
Okay. Thank you.
You had mentioned earlier about working on some ordinances there in Nye County. Could you briefly give us a description of your experience with that type of development, whether it's ordinances, resolutions, bill draft reviews?
Absolutely. I have done all of those since the start of my career in Sparks. I was responsible for, I represented the Civil Service Commission in Sparks, and so I was responsible for writing, rewriting, and writing new civil service ordinances. In Mesquite, we were in the process of writing all the code, basically. Our code was very old when I got there. We were rewriting all the code for that. I was responsible for reviewing the bill drafts that the city would submit before they went up to the legislature. When I was in private practice, I worked for Pitagoff Law. We were a law firm that worked through the Pool Pact to represent municipalities. I worked with Armagosa Valley during that period of time to rewrite all their personnel policies. And in Nye County, I have rewritten the brothel ordinance. We're working on Title VI, which is our animal ordinance. And again, I'm responsible right now for monitoring the legislature and getting back to the board and commissions and the department heads about potential litigation that might affect their departments. So it's 23 years of that.
Thank you. Any other questions from council members? Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, I know it's going to sound like a funny question, but somebody asked me to ask this question. If I were to come to you and ask you about a particular ordinance, a particular fact of law, something from NRS, and you did the research and came back to me and gave me the answer, how likely would it be that several months down the road, I asked you, or somebody else asked you about the same thing, that you would have that available to you in the top of your mind?
I'm very good with facts of cases. I'm horrible with names of cases. So, and it's been that way since I was in law school. So I wouldn't necessarily remember Miranda v. Arizona, but I remember, oh yeah, you have to read someone their rights before you question them. And so if I'm given a similar fact pattern, I actually have a dear friend who passed recently. We became friends in Mesquite. And the reason we became friends is she was this very sweet old lady. And the very first night I was appointed, she came up to me and she asked me a question. And it was one of those questions that had 15 if this, then that, and this, and that. And I looked right at her and I said, I don't know, but I will research it and I will get back to you. And her name was Karen Beardsley, and Karen told me that she loved that about me because I was the first lawyer she had met in Mesquite who didn't try to bluster my way into an answer. I didn't know it. I was willing to say I didn't know it and that I would research it. Once I've researched something, then all the hard work's done. Then it's there. It's in your head, or you have, I keep notebooks of issues that have come up before so we can go back to them when that happens, because lawyers do not like to reinvent the wheel. So if it's come up before, let's look at where we started, even if there's a little bit of a twist to it. Here's where we started. Now let's research that twist.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilmember Folda?
Thank you. I just had one other question. I said, do you have anything that may come up in a background check that you would like to address head on?
I believe, yes, and I appreciate the opportunity. I believe that on the application, there was a question about whether or not you've ever, or in the last 7 years, have you ever been disciplined by an employee, by an employer? And it so happens that in 2019, I was. And let me start by saying, I did it. I was wrong. And anything I say to try to put it in context, I do not mean to minimize it in any way. So as I put it in context for you, I am not trying to minimize it. It was my fault. I will say 2019 was probably the worst year of my life. My mother-in-law was diagnosed with spinal cancer that metastasized, and she was put into hospice. My husband was diagnosed with a very serious medical condition. And I think my tolerance was low at the time. And one day at my job, we had an employee who got into a screaming match with her supervisor in front of a large group of people. And it was right before lunch when it happened. And rather than come back from lunch and sort of face the music of You can't scream at your supervisor in front of everyone. She immediately went to Human Resources and took 12 weeks family medical leave, from which she never came back. I felt that it was sort of the coward's way out, and I made a comment to that effect, and it was wrong, and I understand how it was not helpful. And I am professionally and personally embarrassed by it. That would likely come up in a background check. You guys would find that out. But I think what I've done to make sure that that never happens again, I think my tolerance was a little low for the silliness of what I saw as misusing something that's actually supposed to help sick people. You know, there are people who really need family medical leave. And if you're doing it just to get out of yelling at your boss, you're doing it for the wrong reasons. But one of the things that I did is I am currently a mentor for the Transition into Practice program with the State Bar of Nevada. And what that is that's where they take us old attorneys and they pair us with new attorneys. In fact, I'm mentoring somebody who went to law school with your acting city attorney right now. And so I'm mentoring him, and through mentoring him, I'm going back through all the rules and all the, the ethical canons and just best practices. And I think it's a good reminder for me. It's a good reminder for me that even though my tolerance was low and I lost my temper and I said something that I truly regret, that this is how I can turn it around and make it better, is that I can actually mentor someone who's coming up to make sure that hopefully someday they don't make that same mistake.
Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes. Do you understand the importance of confidentiality? And if so, could you give us an example?
Yes. Confidentiality is very important given what we do. And there are times I was mentored myself when I was a new attorney by Robert Ulrich in the Sparks City Attorney's Office. And Bob was the first attorney who taught me to say it's perfectly okay to look at someone and say, I can't tell you that. And I learned that from him because he was great at it. So there are times you can say to someone, I can't tell you that yet. Or eventually you're going to know, but I can't tell you. That's not for me to tell. And as an attorney, especially with 23 years of experience, I carry the privilege. I have to keep it secret. If my client decides to talk about it, that's completely on my client. The privilege is theirs. They can waive if they want, but it's up to me to keep it confidential. And I can't even give all the examples I can think of. I can't give you of confidential information that I have.
Well, thank you so much.
Any other questions? Well, Ms. Gindel, we've asked you a lot of questions today. What questions do you have for us?
Well, I'm curious. As many of you know, I was one of the finalists for this position in 2017. And I would like to know if you think that having been through this process before, I will just tell you, it's exactly like my grandfather said. I'm back because my grandfather said it's just pride, it'll grow back. and it did. I'm here. Do you think that is a benefit or not to me through this process?
Responses? I guess I'm the only person who was here at that time, but anyone else? Councilmember Hoskins?
Well, since I'm one of the elderly people here, I can say through experience, usually you learn from different things, and so I could see a plus and a minus.
Anyone else? Councilmember Bridges?
Thank you. No. I was not around when that went. For me, it has no bearing. But in my perception, there was so much chatter around the last process. good, bad, other, I don't know, I wasn't involved. But except for hearing your name before, I had no opinion about whether you were qualified, not qualified, how that decision was made. So I know for me personally, except for having heard your name before, I have no judgment on whether or not you were the second choice or cut in. I have no idea. So that's where I stand on it.
Anyone else? Well, as the one person here, I think if you want a job, if it becomes open again, it's a good idea to apply for it again. Any other questions that you have for us today?
I'm also curious if you have any questions about my land transactional experience that I've been through.
If there's something you would like to offer, now would be a good time.
Well, I wanted to talk about, because I think it came up with Sarah McKee during the initial interview. She had talked about your experience with land transactions, and again, that's something I've been doing for 23 years. I was able to tell her a funny story in Sparks, where we found out that a Boys and Girls Club was built 4 feet into Reno, and we had to go through the process of taking down a certain portion of the border so that the Boys and Girls Club could get a break on taxes and be all in one city. Mesquite had an airport. So I'm familiar with your airport and all the contracts and liability that comes with that. Mesquite also had a hospital that had land use. It was able to be built based on a land use ordinance, and then as it got into practice, it wasn't able. The practice wasn't the reality that was imagined when the ordinance was written. So we were going through the process of loosening some of those restrictions on the hospital through a land use ordinance, also taking down land outside of Bunkerville so the city would have more land along I-15 for exits and development that it wanted to do. I actually, and I don't know if I got to mention it today, I've actually done work for Boulder City before through the pool pack, because when I was at Pittigoff Law Office, unfortunately, there was a death at a BMX park. And I was actually one of the attorneys who worked on that when there was a wrongful death lawsuit against Boulder City. So I really have had a career that's been devoted to municipal law. And when I say that municipal law are first responders, I really mean that. And I really believe that it's sort of its own specialty. It's not like, oh, if you do bankruptcy, you can do municipal law. There's a lot that comes with it. And it really is a special entity unto itself.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, two biggies over the last few years. When you were in Mesquite or in your other positions, had you a chance to deal with airport issues?
Yes.
And also open meeting law issues?
Airport issues and open meeting law issues. Airport issues mostly in Mesquite. And it was use, it was long-term leases, it was fueling issues. We had a manager that worked up there, and when we had to replace him, that was horrible because it was a very specialty kind of thing. In Nye County, I have worked more on open meeting. Well, I'll say in Sparks and Nye County. I've had to write opinions or defenses to the state about our open meeting law. We've had several alleged violations. We've defensed most of those, which I'm proud of.
Anyone else? Ms. Kendall, any additional questions for us?
I have one, and it's a very direct question. And it's hard to ask direct questions without sounding rude, so please know that it's not my intention to sound rude today at all. I watched with some interest your March 23rd meeting, and that was when Ms. McKee from HR Gov was here and kind of presenting all of the candidates to you. As an aside, I forgot to mention that also when I started in Mesquite, right after I started, they had terminated their city manager. So I've even worked in the position that you guys are in right now, where you have a new city attorney and a new city manager. And I know the unique sort of challenges that you face when you're replacing a senior staff all at one time. So when I say that I feel like if you put my resume in a computer, or you put your requirements in a computer, it would spit out my resume, even with some of these twists. Like, well, we need someone who, has done this without a city manager, right here, kind of thing. But as I watched that meeting, Mayor, I heard you and I believe 2 other council members say that if the vote was going to be held that day, you would vote for your acting city attorney. And I've been approached by some people in the public, and I wanted to give you guys the opportunity sort of to belay any concerns either candidates or residents may have about your open-mindedness as we go through this process.
I don't recall making such a statement. I do know which candidates that I said I was most interested in, but I don't recall making that statement. Anyone else? Councilmember Folda?
Thank you. I don't remember saying that we take a vote at that time. That's what it would be, but I did say rank, in the order. I believe when I repeated off, I gave 3 or 4 that I ranked 1 and 2, and then I think I had 3 of them kind of tied. So, but it wasn't this would be going forward. It was very open to this is going forward to the next stage, which we're at now, and I'm more than open and willing to hear from all the candidates. They all get the open opportunity to present themselves to be heard, and we're just moving forward to the next stage of the process, not voting. We weren't voting on that day or on this day yet either. We're just moving through it. So yeah, I think I'm very open-minded to hear from everyone, and everyone has the same opportunity and the same questions presented for them, for the council to hear. Thank you.
Councilmember Bridges?
I used to teach marketing, and we talked about concepts of recency and frequency. And I can say that in my experience, our current acting city attorney has had the benefit of recency and frequency. I come in here thinking, she's pretty good. I like her. I also remember the second thing I said was, I really wanted to meet you because I had heard about you, and I had heard about all the stuff that went on when the last time we were hiring a city attorney, and that I had heard your name, and I never heard anything disparaging about you. And so I can tell you honestly that I am here with a very open mind about who gets chosen in terms of looking at answers to questions, looking at the criteria that we're using to judge. So that's where I stand today. Thank you.
And I appreciate that very much. And like I said, I wanted to give you the opportunity because it was a question that was asked of me that I certainly couldn't answer.
Yes, and you related that you had watched the meeting, so I'm not sure why you had that recollection that was a statement that I had made, but I do appreciate you bringing that forward. Councilmember Hoskins?
Oh, yes, and your name, I mentioned your name, so you came highly recommended. So I don't want you to feel bad about that, but my mind is open. I've not selected anyone at this point. Thank you.
Councilmember Adams?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is just a very, very important part of the next step. You know, before we had pieces of paper in front of us. And, you know, now we have the opportunity to actually hear from those that stood out to us most, you know. And so, you know, this is something that I've been very much looking forward to, you know, to actually have this opportunity to get to put a face to the name, to understand more of who they are as they relate to their experiences that were presented to us, and so that we can finally start to put all of that together. Absolutely, I think everyone here is coming with a very open mind and looking to, you know, put the city on the best foot forward. So this is just an important part of the process and getting to meet everybody. So it's that, you know, and that's where we're at right now, is just another step in that process. And I think it's a good thing that we're all here today having these discussions.
Anyone else? All right, Ms. Kendall, I do appreciate you coming today and answering all our questions for us. Mr. Bolt, I would like to, and we'll get a consensus here of council members, to have a few minutes to complete the evaluation sheets before we have the next candidate come in.
Just let me know when you're ready.
All right. And again, Ms. Kendall, thank you very much. I appreciate you participating in the process for the second time.
Well, I want to thank you all for your time and your consideration. And Boulder City, I would be honored to work here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to forget my purse. Or trip over it, and that would be very equally embarrassing.
Madam City Clerk, would you prefer a recess so that we can complete these, or can we take a few minutes? All right, we'll go ahead and take a recess then and begin back at 2:20, about 10 minutes. Thank you. Thank you. We will bring the meeting back to order then. And Mr. Bolt, if you would bring the next candidate forward, Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith, welcome.
Yes, Mayor, Council, honorable members of the administration. I'm Stephen F. Smith. You can call me Stephen.
Thank
May I have
you.
a minute just to unload my things?
Sure.
I'm going to keep my phone on just in case something like that ran out without a copy or something. Hope it doesn't ring. Let me shut the ringer off. There we go. All right. Well, this is a challenge. A podium almost as tall as me and a mask, you know?
Well, we get to be seated.
Right. I was first in my class, but I don't mean academically. So it was just a joke, you know?
Ms. McKee, would you like to review the process?
Yes, absolutely, Mayor. So this is candidate Smith. He's here today to answer your questions, and then we will allow you to ask questions and then have him a moment if he needs to ask some questions of you. So with that, I believe Councilman, let's introduce ourselves to him, if you would, please.
All right. Mayor McManus.
I'm Councilmember Adams.
Councilwoman Claudia Bridges.
Councilmember Hoskins.
Councilwoman Folda.
May I interject? I just wanted to say thank you for bringing to my attention that my resume had a boo-boo on it. It was a conversion error, and I fixed it. I don't know if they got, I had a little somebody mentioned, if it wasn't you, a little dollar sign or something that,
Yeah, I believe you had dollar signs where there are commas.
yeah, it happens when you have conversion issues, and old software too,
Thank you, sir.
Can't trust those computers. All right, we'll begin with Councilmember Adams.
Thank you, Mayor. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in our city attorney position at this point in your career.
Well, a little about myself is a little hard, but the Boulder City is a great city. I've had a love affair with this place since I've moved up here from Arizona. It was the first place I stopped. And city attorney, this is a coveted position, unique position because it's appointed. Up in Reno, let's say, there you have to get elected to become city attorney. I did network through the public lawyers with your previous long-standing city attorney, who I got to know, fairly well as a colleague, and touch base with him on public records, open meeting law issues that he had seen, and SLAPP statutes and things like that. So anyway, I played cops and robbers. I was a prosecutor in Phoenix, Maricopa County for 5 years. I was police legal advisor. I did misdemeanors, felonies. I went as high as a murder in the second degree. I worked with the infamous Juan Martinez, the Jodi Arias prosecutor. You may have heard about that case ad nauseum. Then I went to work for Fireman's Fund, the staff counsel, and they insured all the casinos in Nevada. I had to get a Nevada license. And the Las Vegas Visitors and Convention Authority. And then I made a connection and I got moved here by Nevada Power Company. And I was originally hired as the claims counsel for Nevada Power, but I soon learned that I was going to be putting transmission lines in people's neighborhoods. So I did a lot of eminent domain. I interacted extensively with different cities and the Clark County to get facilities approved. I had to do a lot of contract work, a lot of indemnification, insurance work. I filled in for a time as the claims manager, risk manager, was involved in purchasing insurance products. I think my claim to fame there was I was able to manage outside counsel, and I had learned that from working for Fireman's Fund. Insurance companies don't like to pay attorney's fees any more than anybody else, so I have a pretty foolproof system that I won't bore you with to keep track of litigation, because no attorney can handle it all, particularly in an organization. I left the power company, went to work for a short period of time at Division of Industrial Relations, went back to private practice, insurance defense, and then I went to work for the Southern Nevada Health District, which is a local government entity very similar to other local government entities. We had a board comprised of elected and appointed officials. I did a lot of advice on open meeting law, ethics in government. I could say that I protected my client. We never had one open meeting law violation, although we even had a board member that made a complaint against us, claiming that when we were doing board briefings that it was a rolling quorum. And then we had others complain about this, that, and the other thing. And, I was very active and involved in the public lawyers section, so I got to know the individuals at the Attorney General's office, and they got to know me, and I answered all the complaints. And I think you had mentioned in the screening that legal scholarship you put a premium on. I've been an author on. I wrote the leading article on gun laws, what every lawyer should know about gun laws. At one time you had that prohibition against carrying a loaded gun in through Boulder City. That's since been, I assume, repealed or was made moot. I've taught classes. I've written about the lemon law, alternative dispute resolution. I wrote an article about it. I'm an issue editor with the Nevada Lawyer. I'm active in the Bar Association and serve on different committees. I was appointed by the Supreme Court to the Continuing Legal Education, the CLE Board, and I'm a treasurer of the alternative dispute resolution of the section of the State Bar. So there you have it. I've done a lot of litigation. I've taken 6 cases up to the Nevada Supreme Court. I've reported decision in Nichols on eminent domain. Plus many other cases. I was involved in the Nevada Clean Indoor Air Act and which, thank goodness, I don't think you have some of those issues there, because it arose mostly in the gaming setting, so there you have it.
Thank you.
All right, and what do you consider to be the primary responsibilities of the city attorney position, and how has your career prepared you to assume the duties of the city attorney position?
Well, I just had my problem is I got too many papers here today. I just had a copy of the charter dealing with a description of the duties and responsibilities of the, let me put my fingers on it, and it's pretty specific as to what, but, primarily the city attorney is the a legal advisor to the mayor and the council, to the boards and to public officials, and also to answer questions that arise from time to time from citizens. But I think, you have to attend, it's right in the charter that you must attend every city council meeting, so attend the meeting I will. And I just have tremendous amount of experience in all different roles and functions. And I've been in Nevada since the early 90s, and I kind of know the lay of the land.
Thank you. Councilmember Bridges?
I found it, by the way, the charter section there. Section 15. Yeah.
Okay, you are concerned that an agenda item or a discussion during a council meeting is off track in terms of possible open meeting laws or NRS. How do you communicate that concern to members of council?
Oh, I faced that problem many times at the health district, which would sometimes the agendas would be a runaway train. If it's not specifically provided for in the agenda with proper notice to the parties, then you cannot take any action, and then I must rise to my feet and advise the mayor and the council and as well as the citizens that we need to slow down, that we have now gone outside of the agenda, and if we take any actions, it could be a violation of the open meeting law. And it's one of the, the problems with the open meeting law is that it puts the onus on the legal advisor to make sure that there is compliance with the open meeting law. So I will speak up, even though it may be to the consternation of whoever's putting that meeting on that issue on the agenda. So you got to make sure that it fits within the four squares of the document, 4 corners of the document, and that the citizens and everybody else have knowledge about it, so that if there's any, change, you must give everybody an opportunity to be heard. So I would advise it's a no-go.
Thank you. Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes. What processes or procedures would you follow in communicating with the city council, the city manager, and the city staff? And how would you keep them informed and avoid surprises on current or ongoing issues? Okay,
so the first question, again, to make sure I don't miss anything here, was about forms of communication. Obviously, attorney-client privilege may take out something out of the public records law, which is another law that you have to be in compliance with, and is very difficult. So you have to, I think on sensitive matters, I would advise the mayor and council, I think it's better to pick up the phone. Texts are public record. I mean, it just is going to kind of depend whether it fits within the ambit of legal advice or not. And always remember that the judge is going to get to see it, whether it's attorney-client privilege or attorney work product or not. So the judge is going to get to see it impounded, in a privilege log. So have to be careful. That's a tricky situation that you have to be wary of. I do like memos. I don't mind communicating by memos, and I don't mind placing that this is attorney-client privilege, attorney work product immune. Please don't circulate to others, because you as the client may reveal it or whatever. And at some point, the advice that I may be giving you, if it's a contentious item, will become public. Because they'll say, well, our city attorney has advised us of such and such. And then what was the second part of your question?
How would you keep them informed and avoid surprises on current or ongoing issues?
Okay, well, right now, as Mark Twain said, nobody's safe. The legislature's in session, and he was writing about the Nevada Territorial Legislature in 1859 when he made that great quote. I'm a great fan of Mark Twain. We want to follow what's going on in the legislature. We want to follow on what's going on with the community and different issues and the concerns of the citizens. Obviously, there's all kinds of hot button items dealing with growth and services and whatnot. You have your own utility district, which I understand does your own utility, does a very good job. So I don't think you see many of the thorny issues dealing with utilities. Obviously, crime and what's going on within the city boundaries is important for the citizens in the police department and addressing their concerns. So that's kind of how I would keep up on what's going on.
Thank you.
Councilmember Folda?
Thank you. My question is, if faced with a situation where a resident brings a complaint against a council member, where they believe something unethical or perhaps illegal has been done by that council member, how would you handle that situation?
Well, usually those issues never amount to a hill of beans, but you still have to take them seriously and look into it. Anything that involves an allegation of a crime has to be looked at by law enforcement, whether it's local city law enforcement or the district attorney or the attorney general's office. So, I mean, I would look at the merits of what I see based on the allegations and the facts and whatever they're bringing to our attention. And the ethics in government statute is something I have a lot of experience with. And we don't have the typical conflict of interest rules that many people from many other places that they come from. We have an ethics in government statute which sets out certain requirements. And certainly any citizen is free to go make that complaint. I'm not going to go write the complaint for them, or necessarily I'm not their attorney. I'm not going to be giving them legal advice. I'm the city's attorney. So I'm going to listen to them. And, when you're a public official like a city attorney, a lot of stuff's going to cross your desk and a lot of thorny issues. And you got to make judgment calls about it and what to do about it.
Councilmember Adams?
All right. Please define the following words or phrases: property takings, public use, and just compensation
Okay.
with regard to governmental processes.
Okay. Well, I did a lot of eminent domain. I have taken several cases to the Nevada Supreme Court. I have a published opinion that's in Nichols on eminent domain. Now, the public utility has real specific statutory authorization to take property for public use, that being for electric facilities and whatnot. The cities have granted that same authority for public use. What was the three things? Public use?
Property takings, public use, and just compensation.
Well, I always tell my client, if you're planning on, if you really need that piece of property, the best thing when you're dealing with just compensation is to not bring in eminent domain. It's probably a lot cheaper to get it outside of eminent domain, because it's like, they're going to hit the jackpot with a potential award. Public use has become trickier for the cities. I continue the network through the public lawyers when I was at the power company. And thereafter, I formed a group of all the land use and attorneys that were handling condemnation, and we'd put on a CLE and we'd bring in a speaker, usually an appraiser or something like that, to talk about. There's been, we have the pistol initiative in Nevada, which puts restrictions, and you have a U.S. Supreme Court case, the Kelo case, I forget how it's pronounced. With respect to the city, you got to look at what's in your charter, what's in the statutes. You got to make sure you follow the right procedures. You put on an item for a public taking, why you need this and whatnot, and you got to go through a lot of the steps. I networked extensively with the city of Las Vegas during the time that they had the the Fremont Street, the redevelopment, and those cases were tied up for years and years. They did get to take the property, but then, the payment and whatnot in the back, the interest that accumulated on it was just enormous. I think there were a couple of landowners that wouldn't cooperate with it. So, but generally the courts are going to side on the favor of a government or a utility for a public taking, as long as it's for a public purpose. The Kelo case involved taking a residential neighborhood and making it into a higher, more density, more tax, would produce more taxes, and there was some consternation about that, and we got the pistol initiative in Nevada over that.
Thank you.
Does the process used for the creation of the charter differ from the creation of other municipalities in Nevada? If there are differences, do the differences provide any advantages or disadvantages to the viability of the city charter? We'll wait for the interruption to end.
Yeah, you might want to.
Let me begin again.
Yeah.
Does the process used for the creation of the charter differ from the creation of other municipalities in Nevada? If there are differences, do the differences provide any advantages or disadvantages to the viability of the city charter? The legislative climate regarding local government is changing in Nevada and other states. How has it changed from your perspective, and what do you think municipalities need to do to be successful in this changed environment?
Oh, my. Okay.
It's the longest question, trust me.
Yeah, I may have to have you break it down into pieces. Okay, let's deal with charters. To my knowledge, because I dealt with so many different cities, in my work, particularly at the power company, I dealt with North Las Vegas. I dealt with the city of Henderson, which had caused us some issues with utility approvals. City of Las Vegas, who we wound up suing. Unfortunately, successfully, we tried to avoid a suit if all possible. And Clark County, who we had very, very good relations with, I think. As far as I know, all cities have charters, and it's part of Dillon's rule and home rule that you want the charter to set out what powers that you have. If I think I pulled the charter up on my phone, I copied it. Was being chintzy, and I only copied the section dealing with the city attorney because I thought the questions were going to be in that area. I know Boulder has quite an extensive and quite an unusual charter because it goes all the way back to the 1920s, 1930s when it was created, and it has because you have Boulder Dam, which now we call Hoover Dam. You have the Boulder Dam, and we have so many of the historic buildings. Let's see, what was the other parts of your question there? Forgive me.
If there are differences between this and others, do the differences provide any advantages or disadvantages to the viability of the city charter? Legislative climate regarding local governments is changing in Nevada and other states. How has it changed from your perspective, and what do you think municipalities need to do to be successful in this changed environment?
Well, the big ticket item, and I haven't followed this legislative session about, but every 2 years there is a bill on giving Dillon's and giving more home rule to each of the cities. I think Clark County would like more additional authority for taxation. I think the environment is friendlier for local government in the legislature today than it's been in the past. So I think if there's anything that you want to change or are looking for legislative relief, this is the time to bring it. If you haven't brought it already, I'm not really certain. I haven't, like I said, I haven't seen any bills about it. I mean, I did a issue with Nevada lawyer on municipal law, and there was quite an extensive article that we had an attorney who was an expert in that area write for us on Dillon's rule and the home rule. So those are the big issues there that I see. Did I answer your question? Was there other?
Yes, thank you. Councilmember Bridges?
Yes, thank you. Okay, the city charter contains provisions for initiatives and referendums by citizens to adopt or repeal city ordinances. The charter further prohibits the city council from amending or repealing any ordinances approved or adopted by the voters. Are you aware of any city charter, state constitution, or U.S. Constitution provisions that would remove the prohibition of the city council to amend or repeal ordinances approved by the voters?
Oh, boy. Off the top of my head, no, but I mean, I am aware of the litigation that one of the SLAP lawsuit that was brought by your former councilwoman that had an unfortunate fortunate outcome. I'm not aware of any, but I haven't, specifically studied that area. I mean, I could get, if that's a hot button topic, if I'm the successful candidate and you bring me on here, I have a network of city and city attorneys that I could tap into to kind of bounce that off of and kind of do some additional research on it. It's not something that I have looked at prior to today, to be honest with you. But initiatives are always going to be a problem. That's if it's provided for, it's provided for. And so you're talking about, can the city council overturn an ordinance that was brought by an initiative, is your question, right? Well, I guess it's, well, that sounds like an issue that would end up in front of the Nevada Supreme Court, to be honest with you, for clarification. You certainly could bring a declaratory relief action to get a statement of the law about it or an advisory opinion. And there are provisions in the law to allow that. I would say we'd have to look at what was the percentage. Did 2/3 of the citizens vote on the initiative? I mean, it was a lot of, the initiative for the Nevada Clean Indoor Act caused a lot of heartburn for a lot of people, particularly the businesses that had to come into compliance, and there were a lot of challenges and or supposed challenges that were going to occur. When all was said and done, I think the law was essentially rendered meaningless through saying that they couldn't enforce it. So I would say probably that's a difficult question. I'd say probably not would be my gut reaction, but I'd have to take a closer look, to be honest with you. I don't want to give an advisory legal opinion here that you might want to hold me to. It's certainly something to look into. Because I can understand why the mayor and council may want to overturn or adopt an ordinance of something that was very unpopular or not very wise that was passed by initiative.
Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes. If you were elected, tell us what you would tackle during the first 90 days in this position and why.
Well, it's just, sort of what they teach teach attorneys on client relations. You got to manage up, got to manage across, got to manage down. So the first thing I would do is I would meet with the mayor and council, and then I would meet with the different city officials, the acting city clerk, you don't have a municipal administrator yet, you're going to be hiring city manager, for that position. I'd meet with them. I'd meet with the police department because the city attorney is the prosecutor, and I have that background in criminal law because I'm one of the few attorneys that's ambidextrous. I also have criminal experience here in Nevada because I was a pro tem justice of the peace and handled all kinds of criminal cases and whatnot. I was a traffic judge, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody's ever texting on their phone, by the way. I have never met anybody that admits they've texting on their phone. You know, you want to get, and you want to meet with maybe different citizens groups, have an open door, and make sure that, you know, you can be reached. But again, I have to tell them that I'm not their attorney. I'm the city's legal advisor. You know, you can ask me legal questions, but what I'm going to give you is not going to be legal advice, you know. I could point you in the right direction. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Councilmember Folda?
Thank you. How do you see the city's attorney's role in relation to the city council, the residents, and the city staff?
Well, I think I sort of addressed that a little bit in the previous question. Well, first of all, it's kind of important to emphasize, because this is something they teach us public lawyers in all the classes that we get, that although, Honorable Mayor, you may think that I'm your attorney, I'm the attorney for the office, not for you personally. It's kind of a distinction without a meaning, but that's, you know, very important, that I'm for the institution, if you will. But of course, it really defies logic to draw that distinction. But because I have to work with each and every one of you and, you know, earn your trust and confidence that, you know, you'll want to keep me, you know, in the position. So, you know, good relations with the elected officials as well as the city staff. You know, you can't have contempt of the city staff and succeed in this job. You must likewise earn their trust and confidence. And, you know, you have to prioritize your time. And, you know, obviously the elected officials, the mayor and the council, you get that phone call, I'm going to do my best to return it that day. And the same with the city staff. Citizens are a little bit different, you know, acknowledge that I've received something and can I get back to you? Can I speak with you? Whatever, at the next meeting, when I address your concerns. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Councilmember Adams?
Thank you, Mayor. What do you consider to be a professional weakness, and what have you done to try and improve on that weakness?
You mean me personally, you mean?
The question is, what do you consider to be a professional weakness, and what have you done to try and improve on that weakness?
I tend to take on more work than I can handle and get myself in trouble, so I have to learn to time manage. And so if I'm the successful candidate, you're going to see a lot of Post-its and charts and graphs. I got to do this today, that today. You know, learning how to manage your time and keep everybody happy is probably, and easier said than done, particularly when you're the only city attorney, and I assume you have a support staff. I do remember there being a legal assistant or a paralegal here, you know, at the times I dealt with your prior long-standing attorney. So, you know, having staff to help out is critical to help you manage the job.
Thank you.
How would you define the term public service, and what is your opinion on whether the city attorney is a public servant?
Well, you're a public official for sure. Public service is service for the public good. I mean, that's what I like about this position, is that, you know, you get to do some good and you get to get paid for it, which is quite remarkable. You're not, you know, defending a person's, company, entity's pecuniary interest, if you will. You know, you always have the public good at heart and at mind. And sometimes that's the job of the city attorney, is to advise what is in the public interest, what is the public good. Is this a hill to die for? Whose ox has been gored, you know, as they say. Was there another part of your question there? Did I?
It was my question, and no, I think you've answered that question. Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. There are times that a novel legal issue with opposing legal opinions with no prior precedents faces a city. How would you approach an issue such as this to ensure the city is best protected and that it proceeds in an appropriate manner?
Well, there are several ways to approach the problem. I always view my job is kind of like risk assessment and risk avoidance. And you lay out the different arguments and countervailing legal theories as best you can, because sometimes you don't see all of them. They come up later in a challenge on a thorny issue, like something like growth, where you're trying to restrict growth or keep the certain zoning and character of the city. Sometimes you have to say, this is such a thorny issue that I would ask for permission and seek and get it to get advisory counsel, get someone who's an expert, if you will, who has seen this issue to kind of lay out the lay of the land, so to speak. So sometimes you have to do that. But I give legal advice. I'm not the city, even though I'm a public official and the city attorney. If I'm the successful candidate in this role, I give legal advice, and I can only look at the advice that I can give, and whether the risks and the benefits, and then you have to decide, because you're the client, you're the boss, you're the elected official, or if it's a thorny issue that's arising at the city staff level officials. And we have to look at there's always going to be, there's risk for the government in everything that they do. We can never minimize risk. We can only, never do away with risk, excuse me. We can only minimize it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Bridges?
Thank you. It is well known that Boulder City has a controlled growth ordinance. What is your opinion on how legally sound it is, and if you believe it is not, why?
To my knowledge, I am not aware of any, only from public records and looking, at it in the newspaper and hearing from people that I know in the city. As far as I know, it's not been fully challenged, and it's stood up as far as I know. You may know something more than I do, obviously, at this juncture, but I would say that an ordinance that's been in effect for some time is presumed valid. So it's difficult for developers to challenge ordinances, but some have been successful. So I've seen that in my dealings with at the power company, and we're involved with some developers that want to bring power to different facilities, different land, and their thing is tied up in zoning or it's not getting city approval. So it's not easy fighting City Hall. It's a big burden placed on the aggrieved individual, company, or whatever. I think your rules have been, clearly stated, and everybody kind of knows. And to my knowledge, you haven't had a lot of vacant land. I don't see the next Green Valley or Summerlin coming here, so there's less opportunity for developers and property owners to challenge some of the requirements.
Councilmember Fold?
Thank you. The city attorney has a lot of spinning plates at any given time, and typically each council meeting will lend another spinning plate. What do you do to stay organized, and how do you prioritize to keep from dropping one of those plates?
Okay, spinning plates, did you say? Mm-hmm. I want to make sure I heard that right.
For the record, that wasn't my question.
It was not your question?
Well, we all submitted questions. This
Okay.
wasn't one that I wrote like this, but
Okay.
anyways, it's about prioritizing.
Well, I always think of, those performers that have the plates on the, right? And the jugglers. You have to learn to juggle and tap dance, to keep everybody happy. Do the best you can. Stuff's going to fall through the cracks. It's inevitable sooner or later. Something's plate's going to fall and break. But I'll do my best to make sure it doesn't happen. Pledge you my best efforts.
All right. A question that I have is regarding the preparation of ordinances, resolutions, bill draft reviews, those types of things. Can you speak to your experience in those areas?
Yes. Well, when I was at the power company, we had a lot of egregious bills that made it through the legislature, and I had to go up and testify against them, more or less. Like one of them was a bill that said that if the power company doesn't have an easement, that it owes all this a back compensation for a prescriptive easement. You know, a lot of things just exist out in public lands, if you will. Nobody knows what they are or how they got there. I mean, they can't even agree on who owns a sidewalk on the Las Vegas Strip, or who owns the sidewalk on a strip mall or whatever. You know, because sometimes it's not so clear. Can you repeat your question again? I lost in a tangent. I'm sorry.
It just has to do with your experience with ordinances,
Right.
resolutions,
Right.
bill draft reviews.
I went before the legislature when I was with the health district, but our bill got killed. We wanted to make any investigation that the health district did, because we had the endoscopy Hep C investigation, and we had a judge order us to produce all those records, and it was over 1 million pages of records. And the judge said to me, "Well, just do the best you can." I said, "Okay, well, I'll do one a day, and it'll take me 1 million days. Is that what you want?" With the privilege log and everything. So we tried to get a bill that basically said that we had the same protection as OSHA, that anything we do within that is subject to kind of like an investigatory privilege, and we can decide, you know, what's to be released to protect the informants and the public health. We didn't get. It's tough getting in the way. It's tough getting a bill up there. We went to a hearing, and then it never happened. I mean, you hear the stories in the legislature of bills that they always used to back in the days when you could meet with legislatures and go up there and watch what was going on. That they closed the door, if you will. So I mean, I had when I was at the health district, we had one elected official said, "Why can't we regulate puppy mills?" So I had to go do a research on, well, you know, the health district's humans. We're not involved with pets, and so unless it's a threat to health, I wrote a lot of things for the health district. We did a lot of we spoke a lot through regulations and policy statements and things of that nature. You know, and I dealt with a lot of the different cities: Henderson, North Las Vegas, Clark County, and their ordinances, and you know, sought to seek relief from some of the onerous requirements. And sometimes we were successful, and sometimes we weren't.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes. Do you understand the importance of confidentiality? And if so, give us an example.
Oh, absolutely. Well, as an attorney, we have attorney-client privilege. So that is just absolutely critical. If I'm meeting with you one-on-one or with a breakout session, not a quorum, that those conversations are privileged. And then I'm going to bring them to my grave. I mean, confidentiality, I mean, that was what we had the biggest public records request and discovery request when I was at the health district dealing with a disease investigation where, you know, people were asked private and confidential information about their personal hygiene, you know, and people expect that to not be revealed or released. And, you know, there are statutes that also provide for certain confidentiality and certain confidences. Like if the council is making a recommendation for a investigation, that would be, you know, not subject to the public records law, and could also be attorney-client privilege, attorney-work product.
Thank you, sir.
Councilmember Bridges?
Yes, if someone or I came to ask you a question about a particular issue, and it was not something you were familiar with, but you had to look it up, would you have it on your mind later? Someone comes up to you at some point in a future time and says, are you familiar with this? How would it be more likely that you would say, let me look into it again, or would you have that recollection or some kind of record of that?
Well, I do believe in, we lawyers are trained, if it's not written down, it's, did it really happen? But that's particularly when you're dealing with claims against you as an attorney. But, yeah, I would write it down, and it would be posted in my office, and I'd put a date, a drop dead date on it. And, I'm one of these people that I wake up at night, and sometimes I turn the computer on, and then I just start to go to work, and my wife will say, it's 2 o'clock, are you going to bed? And so, I tend to remember a lot of things and work on a lot of things because you get some good quiet time at home. And particularly with the pandemic, I've been working at home to the point where it's getting to be looking forward to getting out again,
And the second one was on two specific issues of real estate transactions and airports. What has been your experience with those? Either one.
Well, when I was at the power company, I did a lot of real estate transactions for them because they were, at that one time, one of the largest landholders in the state. And so a lot of the land use consultants used to get into all kinds of trouble, so to speak, because they would start going into negotiations with a very aggressive buyer. And then, well, let's just bring it up to legal and see what they think. And I go, well, how far along are you with this? How come we never heard about this before? This has got to go to one of the officers, and they got to bring this before the board. You have to follow the protocols. A real estate transaction is not two individuals, a willing seller and a willing buyer. We're dealing with acquisition of public land or the sale of public land. I dealt extensively with the airport, with the power company, because we had all kinds of issues with them as where was the facility is going to be located. What happens when you're on the choo-choo train that takes you to different terminals, and there's a power outage and everybody falls down? Is that the airport's problem? Is that the power company's problem? So I dealt a lot with real estate transactions, and of course, I had to review a lot of contracts. Was involved in contract litigation. Sometimes you have an agreement to make an agreement. You have to make sure that all the city processes and procedures, they have to have I think a process. I think everybody at the city should be, one of the things I would do is set out a process where they would follow protocol, and it has to be run up the flagpole to make sure that acquisition or that sale is in the public interest, and it's that somebody hasn't left the reservation and got into something they think is in the public interest, but prior approval process. And it's either in your charter or it's in ordinances or by practice, or the common law of the shop, as they say, by practice or by procedure.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Folda?
Thank you. I had one other question. Do you have anything that may come up in your background check that you would like to address head on?
To my knowledge, but with the name of Stephen Smith, you just never know. I'm not related to. There was 4 of us in Arizona, and one time I was sitting at my desk, and the judge says to me, "Mr. Smith, I hope you bring your toothbrush this time." And I said, "Stephen F. Smith, attorney, is a." "Oh no, this is Stephen E. Smith." "Oh, I'm sorry, Your Honor, it's the wrong Stephen. This is the good Stephen." So as far as I know, nothing, Colonel Hogan, nothing.
Other questions? Well, Mr. Smith, we've asked you a lot of questions today. What questions do you have for us?
What's your timeline? Because I know you have a acting city attorney that I watched the meeting, you're pretty enthused about. So what's your timeline, and what are you thinking here?
We're at this point now, I assume that we have some evaluation sheets that we will be completing, getting back to Ms. McKee. And I don't know that we will make a final decision, but we may invite you back for another interview. So
Another public meeting?
Yes.
Oh,
That's the only way we do things.
okay. Well, there's, when I was hired at the district, I think I was applicant B. I never knew who A was, and they did it that way. I mean, it's different organizations do it differently, and I'm not questioning that. It's just it'd be nice to sit in a more relaxed environment and get some face time so you get to know me, because I understand it's a big decision.
Well, again, Ms. McKee has been outlining this process for us, so we would be looking at a timeline, I think, in the next 2 to 4 weeks.
Okay. And then you're looking to bring the person, either ratify her and make her the city attorney, or what, in the next month, make a decision to have a...
Well, again, because of scheduling meetings, providing announcements, things like that, I would think it would be somewhere in a time frame of that nature.
All right.
Before a decision was made.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased and honored. I hope I answered your questions, and...
Well, we know this isn't easy, asking anyone to come to an interview out in public. I certainly want to thank you for doing so. Appreciate your candor in answering these questions.
All righty.
Thank you, sir.
There's another interview, right? Am I free to...
Yes, we have one more candidate to
Am I
go.
free to...
Yes, you may go at this time. And again, Mr. Bolt, we'll take another 10-minute recess.
I meant, would I be free to sit through it?
I see no problem with that.
Okay.
So we'll take a 10-minute recess and we'll reconvene at 3:20. We will give Council Member Adams another minute or two to return. All right, we're all present. I'll call the meeting back to order. Mr. Bolt, if you'd like to introduce the next candidate.
Yes, Mayor and Council, I present Brittany Walker.
Is the microphone on?
Oh, the last speaker was a little... Mayor and Council, Bryce Bold, Administrative Services Director, and I present Ms. Walker.
Thank you. Ms. Walker, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council members. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Ms. McKee, would you like to review the process, please?
Sure. This is candidate Walker. She's here to answer your questions. I don't know that we need introductions at this point since she's already employed by the city, but we can allow you to introduce yourself and then get started with questions. And then, Ms. Walker, you'll have time to ask questions when they're finished.
Thank you. I'm Mayor McManus.
I'm Councilmember Adams.
Councilwoman Bridges.
Councilmember Hoskins.
Councilwoman Folda.
All right, we will begin with our questions then. Councilmember Adams?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you are interested in our city attorney position at this point in your career.
Thank you, council member, for the question. I'd first like to say that it's a tremendous honor and privilege to have served as your acting city attorney for the past few months. I also want to, in an abundance of caution, disclose that since I am the acting city attorney, I do have a pecuniary interest in this item. Obviously, I'm not here in any official capacity today, but in an abundance of caution, just want to disclose that. To answer your question, I am interested in this position because I have long had a passion for policy and government in the state. I fulfilled that mainly through my tenure at the state legislature, working for both the state government and for representing private entities before the legislature and working on policy initiatives. In my previous legal practice, I also focused on transactional work, contract drafting, purchasing contracts, real estate contracts, things like that. So when this opportunity arose, I thought it was the perfect blend of policy and legal work that would allow me to really fulfill my passions and provide the expertise and knowledge that I've learned in my legal practice and apply it to something bigger and learn a lot more in the process. So when I heard about this opportunity, I reached out and expressed interest, and I believe that this position is really long-term. How I see myself is in municipal government as a municipal attorney. So this opportunity has been tremendous, and I'm so grateful.
Next question. What do you consider to be the primary responsibilities of the city attorney position, and how has your career prepared you to assume the duties of the city attorney position?
Sure. Well, pursuant to the Boulder City Charter, I'm the legal advisor to the council and mayor, as well as the department heads and the public officers. So one of my primary responsibilities in that role is, when legal questions arise, is advising the member or the department head on what the particular course of action should be, pros and cons, and try to recommend a course of action that will minimize liability to the city. Another part of the attorney's responsibilities is communication. So a large part of being a legal advisor is making sure that the council members and the mayor are aware of the legal considerations that are affecting the city. So making sure I'm constantly briefing you as to what is coming down the pike and what's impacting the city, in addition to department heads as well, looking for ways to improve, such as by reviewing our ordinances and seeing ways that they could be updated or improved, and recommending that to department heads as well as council members. In addition, as the city attorney, a large part of my responsibility is transactional drafting and review. We enter into a lot of government contracts as a municipal entity, purchasing real estate. We do a lot of leases. We have a lot of land in Boulder City, license agreements, things like that. And my prior experience at Holland and Hart, I represented several local government entities. I wrote the purchasing policy and updated it based on state law that had passed for one of our local government entities, and as well as reviewed several purchasing contracts and services contracts that local government entered into. So upon joining Boulder City, I was already well versed in what kind of key contract terms are necessary to protect municipality. You want strong indemnification language, make sure the insurance obligations are robust and can protect the city in the event of a dispute or an injury, so that the city is well protected in those circumstances.
Councilmember Bridges?
Thank you. Okay, you are concerned that an agenda item or a discussion during a council meeting is off track in terms of possible open meeting laws or NRS. How do you communicate that concern to members of council? In listening to the discussion, I would see where it was headed. If
The discussion started to go into deliberation, meaning 2 or more council members were starting to deliberate on something that was not properly agendized. Then I would intervene and I would speak up and say, council members, that would be better discussed at a later meeting. Right now we are on, and remind you that of the agenda item that we are on, and redirect the discussion.
Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes, thank you. What process or procedures would you follow in communicating with the city council, the city manager, and city staff? How would you keep them informed and avoid surprises on current or ongoing issues?
In developing process and procedures is really the key here in your question. Having those existing processes and procedures built into your daily and weekly work schedules so that you are constantly communicating with department heads and council members and the city manager to make sure everybody is aware of all of the things impacting the city. As a city, we are a multifaceted entity. We have several departments, and things come up all the time. And so it's so important that you have weekly set check-ins with all department heads and the city manager as well as council members, so that you are making sure and being actively staying actively abreast of everything going on. And because too often what happens is when you don't have those set communication times, it is inadvertently not communicated, and then the problem can get bigger. And so that's why you build in those procedures, weekly meetings, making sure that the expectations are set, and having those in place so that you are constantly in communication and aware and can nip in the bud any sort of issues that are going to arise.
Councilmember Folda?
Thank you. If faced with a situation where a resident brings a complaint against a council member where they believe something unethical or perhaps illegal has been done by that council member, how would you handle that situation?
Well, I would meet with the person and gather all of the facts and as much as information as I could from the situation. As the city attorney, my client is the city, but part of that is also representing the council members, department heads, and city officers when they are acting within the scope of their official duties. So if the alleged conduct occurred when the official was acting in the scope of their official duties, then I, as the city attorney, may have an obligation to defend and represent that person. It really just depends on the facts and circumstances of each case. NRS 41, Chapter 41 has a process by which the person would request representation. I would do an analysis as to whether the conduct fell within the scope of their official duties. And at that time, I would determine whether I could represent them or not. If there was a situation where the person did act unethically or illegally and it was outside of the scope of their official duties, then I would not be able to provide representation. I'd have to act in the best interest of the city at that time.
Councilmember Adams?
Thank you. Please define the following words or phrases: property takings, public use, and just compensation with regard to governmental processes. And I can repeat those for you if you...
Just the third one.
So all three are property takings, public use, and just compensation.
Well, property takings are a very specific thing. Property takings have to do with the United States Constitution, where a government entity can exercise the power of eminent domain in certain circumstances to take physical possession of property that's in the private ownership. And that's what's known as takings under the Takings Clause of the United States Constitution. It can be only used for a public purpose, so the land has to be used for a public good. That's been pretty broadly defined by the United States Supreme Court. I can remember a case where they used it for, I think, a gentrification type of project. So public use tends to just be for the public benefit, for the public welfare. In order to really hone in on that definition, I'd have to review and research case law to really, and it would change depending on the purpose of the term public use, depending on the context in which you're using it in. So I would have to research case law and for the specific context or circumstance to see really what that term means in that particular scenario. But in general, public use is thought to be for the public benefit, for the public welfare, for the benefit of all of the community. Just compensation is a very variable term. Just compensation is something that a jury or a judge in certain circumstances would decide is the appropriate compensation for the wrong that occurred. And so again, that's also a fluid term that can mean different things in different circumstances. Under tort law, you're going to be compensated differently than you would under contract law. So it just depends on, again, the type of wrong and what the person is seeking, what the particular rule is whether if that's, you get your damages as in, if it's a tort and a personal injury, how you were harmed, your medical bills, loss of work, things like that. Or if it's a contract where you should have gotten the benefit of the bargain, but for that breach, you would have. So then you get the value of the contract. So it just depends on different circumstances, what those terms mean.
Thank you.
And I have the longest question of the day. Does the process used for the creation of the charter differ from the creation of other municipalities in Nevada? If there are differences, do the differences provide any advantages or disadvantages to the viability of the city charter? The legislative climate regarding local government is changing in Nevada and other states. How has it changed from your perspective, and what do you think municipalities need to do to be successful in this changed environment?
Well, Boulder City is unique in that we were incorporated after Dwight Eisenhower signed the Boulder City Act. I believe it was 1958, and we then became incorporated that way. We're one of many Nevada cities that are charter cities. To my knowledge, I'm not sure what cities aren't charter cities, but most of the major jurisdictions, I believe, are. If you're not a charter city, you're just a general law city. The distinction is really more important in home rule jurisdictions. The charter is where the city gets its authority, its constitution, its governing document. The cities that don't have charters just have the general laws of the state of Nevada, so they don't have any sort of foundational document governing them. In Nevada, we're a Dillon Rule state, so we're still very much limited in our authority as to under state law. The Dillon Rule essentially is that local governments only have the powers that are expressly given to us by the Nevada state government, or those necessarily implied to carry out those express powers. You mentioned the changing climate. In 2015, Dillon Rule did change somewhat in Nevada. There was a large push for a home rule jurisdiction policy change for the entire state. That ended up being compromised. Dillon Rule essentially is that if the city is not expressly granted the power, then presumed that the city doesn't have the power. Nevada law creates a presumption that if the city is, and I'm paraphrasing here, so I wouldn't take this literally, but if the city is granted the power and it's necessary, it's impliedly necessary to carry out those expressly granted powers, then it's presumed that the city does have the power. So it's a little bit more broad than Dillon Rule traditionally. And the way cities can maximize that is to, if there are certain policy initiatives that they want to pursue and things like that, that they're not sure. There is a lot of things that are sort of gray as to whether local government has the ability to do it or not. If it's expressly reserved to the state by a comprehensive statutory scheme, then the city is presumed not to have that power. But if it's if it's not dedicated to the state and it could be linked to one of the express powers, then the city may have that power. So I think it's really a case-by-case basis. If there's a policy that the city would like to pursue, then as the city attorney, I can do that analysis and let you know whether I believe under Dillon Rule we would have the authority to do that. Because of that change in the state law, we're a little bit more flexible than we used to be on what we can do and what we can't do. So I think in that regard, we can be more proactive as a local government in addressing our community's needs.
Councilmember Bridges.
Thank you. The city charter contains provisions for initiatives and referendums by citizens to adopt or repeal city ordinances. The charter further prohibits the city council from amending or repealing any ordinances approved or adopted by the voters. Are you aware of any city charter, state constitution, or U.S. Constitution provisions that would remove the prohibition of the city council to amend or repeal ordinances approved by the voters?
I am not aware of any sort of state provision that would remove that ability. In our charter, it expressly says that ordinances passed by initiative cannot be amended or repealed unless it's by the voters. And I don't know of any sort of state law, or obviously the state initiative and referendum process is different in that with the state initiative, if you amend either pass a statute or repeal a statute by ordinance or by initiative petition, the state puts a 3-year time frame in which the state legislature is then prohibited from amending it. But after that 3 years is over, the state legislature can go in and amend that statute. The Boulder City Charter does not have that same requirement, and the charter governs because the charter governs over our municipality and our ordinances. So if the charter would govern in that circumstance, and there's no way that the ordinances, if they were passed by initiative petition, could be amended or repealed by this council.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hoskins.
Yes, thank you. If you were selected, tell us what you would tackle during the first 90 days in this position and why.
Thank you for the question, Councilwoman. Yes. If I were appointed to this position, there are a lot of things I would love to do for the city. Our ordinances are really out of date, and some of them are even unconstitutional, so they're really not enforceable as written. One of my major projects would be going through and updating these ordinances so that they're up to date with current Nevada law and current Supreme Court case law, so that they're more comprehensive and enforceable, which is important. In addition, a lot of our laws, I think, could be clarified. There's a lot of our ordinances that are very difficult to understand. A lot of them haven't been updated since we were first incorporated in the 1950s and 60s, possibly have even been there since the 30s, and in that certain language, and the language is very difficult to understand. And I would like to take on, of course, working through the council, you as the policymakers would make the decision on whether to pass the ordinance. But I would enjoy the drafting process and recommending to you language that wouldn't necessarily change anything, but would just make our laws clear so that the public can understand really what is expected of them, and it's more clear in our ordinances what's required, what the rights and obligations of the parties are. That would be a big first step. I think a big project that I would like to take on. Another thing I'd like to do is look at some of our contracts and develop really robust templates. So while serving as your acting city attorney, I updated our purchasing contract using a template that I received from another local government that was very comprehensive and very robust and had very strong provisions that protected the city when disputes arise. And I think similar updates could be made to all of our other types of contracts, our services provider contracts, and things like that. I can make those updates to those so that the city's in a better place when we enter into these agreements should disputes arise. Those are two of the projects that I think would be really important to take on right away.
Well, thank you so much.
Councilmember Folda?
Thank you. How do you see the city attorney's role in relation to the city council, the residents, and the city staff?
Well, first and foremost, as I mentioned before, the city attorney is the legal advisor to the city council. At all times, though, my client is the city. And I act as your legal advisor as you carry out your official positions in directing policy initiatives for the city. So in that role, it's important that I communicate with you, update you, make sure that you're aware of litigation impacting the city, aware of major policy changes that we're going to be considering, and getting that input early on. Section 8 of the city charter vests with you the authority of all policy in the city, and so it's very important that your input is there whenever we're seeking any sort of policy change via updating our ordinances or otherwise. So communication, I think, is the most important aspect of that. With regard to the residents, I am also, under the city charter, the city prosecutor. So I've the obligation to enforce our laws and make sure that they're fairly and equitably enforced. And so part of that is making sure that they're not being arbitrarily or discriminatorily enforced in that regard. And I have a great support staff that helps with that. We have a great criminal prosecutor, Gary Booker, who does a lot for our city, and we have a paralegal who helps a lot with that as well. And so we're fortunate to have a great staff that keeps track of our criminal complaints and what we file and what we prosecute, and making sure that it's being done fairly and equitably. Also, as a city attorney, I feel I am a public officer, so I am in public service. I am a servant to the community and residents. So if there's an issue or anything that residents have, or whether it be with our laws or anything really affecting the city, I feel I have an open door, and I'm always available to meet with residents and hear their concerns about what's going on, because that's also important. These laws impact our residents directly, so it's important to know how they've been impacted, and hearing from them is really the best source for that. With staff, again, like city council, I am the legal advisor to them. So whenever there are issues, things that could be potential litigation, they are very good about coming and briefing me, and we have a direction on where we go. Also, just constant communication, making sure that the policies, procedures, and laws governing their departments in place adequately service and meet their needs, and if they don't, then looking for ways to update them and provide that direction.
Councilmember Adams?
Thank you. What do you consider to be a professional weakness, and what have you done to try and improve on that weakness?
Thank you, Councilman, for the question. I think obviously, I think that the biggest weakness I have is a short legal career. I've been barred since 2017, so it's only 3 years. But in this position, I quickly found that I am not alone. And our sister jurisdictions, the other local governments in the state, have teams of attorneys that are always willing to answer a question, answer a phone call, and lend a helping hand. And as a municipality, the issues that we face are not new. Other governments and local jurisdictions have faced them before, and they probably have a 50-page policy to address it. And so many times I've reached out to our other local government entities, and of course, without revealing confidential information, explained the issue and asked how they've resolved similar issues in the future. Through this, I've gotten template letters, template legal form documents, template contracts, things that I can use to look at and model for the city of Boulder City so that I can continue to improve and modernize with those resources. And so that has been a way that I've been able to compensate for my short legal tenure. While I think that combined with my legislative experience and my transactional drafting experience at Hall and Hart, I have a more than solid foundation for this role.
Next, how would you define the term public service, and what is your opinion on whether the city attorney is a public servant?
Public service to me means you put the needs of the community and the people you serve before your own. And when you are in that role, you are not in it for you in any way. You are there to serve the entity or the people that you have committed to serve. And you at all times put their needs and concerns above yours. With this role, the city attorney is a public servant. So in that regard, at all times, the city attorney is putting the needs of the city above any sort of personal or professional goals. I mean, as a city attorney, you are there to advise the council, advise the department heads, making sure the city is free from, I shouldn't say free from, but to minimize liability and issues that arise in a way that can resolve the dispute without expending too much money on litigation fees or things like that, and working to resolve those things early on as much as you can. Another way the city attorney can do that is by drafting contracts in a way that are really well protect the city, because with the better drafted a contract is, the more protected you are when disputes arise, so that it doesn't ever arise to litigation. It doesn't ever get to a point where either party is in a bad position because the contract governs the issue. It's where contracts are vague and there's, this term says this, and no, we think it means that, and you think it means that, and then we fight in court. So the better drafted the contract is, the more you can insulate yourself from things like that. So those are ways, same with ordinances. And so those are ways that the city attorney, with attention to detail, hard work, and really, putting, again, the city before themselves is able to be in that role.
Thank you. Councilmember Hoskins?
No, thank you, Mayor. There are times that a novel legal issue with opposing legal opinions with no prior precedents faces a city. How would you approach an issue such as this to enhance the city is best protected and that it proceeds in an appropriate means?
Absolutely. Well, that happens all the time. There are so many, especially in Nevada, there's so little case law. There's a lot of issues that come up that there's just no law governing the scenario. And so you have to do your best to navigate what the right thing to do is. And the best way to do it, and I faced this with, we had a redevelopment issue where we had an entity apply for funds. We weren't sure if the entity was eligible to apply for funds. This was when I first started. And it had to do with the Little Blaine Amendment in the State of Nevada Constitution, which prohibits a public entity from providing money to a sectarian institution. And so in reviewing that and determining whether this grant could be approved, Nevada didn't have anything on point, so I looked across the entire United States to see what other jurisdictions facing issues had done. A lot of states have Little Blaine amendments, just like Nevada's, and so I found some case law from New Jersey and other states that had dealt with a similar issue and were able to provide really detailed, tailored guidance, and I could advise the council on how to act, taking even a most conservative approach so that we would be insulated from liability in that circumstance.
Councilmember Bridges?
Thank you. Okay, it is well known that Boulder City has a controlled growth ordinance. What is your opinion on how legally sound it is, and if you believe it is not, why?
Thank you for the question, Councilwoman. I have not looked into the constitutionality of our growth ordinance or what sort of arguments could be made that it is unconstitutional. Typically, jurisdictions have very broad authority over land use in their jurisdictions and can control how land is developed or planned. That's a very settled matter of local concern. So I'm not sure what sort of ways you could argue that that's unconstitutional. And I would have to really research that to see if there's any sort of argument that could be made. To my knowledge, there's nothing off the top of my head that would let me think that that's unconstitutional.
Councilmember Fulda?
Thank you. The city attorney has a lot of spinning plates at any given time, and typically each council meeting will lend another spinning plate. What do you do to stay organized, and how do you prioritize to keep from dropping one of those plates?
Thank you, Councilwoman. That's a good analogy. I'm going to use that. I think that absolutely. Every time we meet as city council, different issues come up, and sometimes it hasn't really been thought about until the meeting. In those circumstances, it is so important that we delay action until I've had a chance to research the issue, because as the city attorney, I know what I know, and I have a good foundational knowledge of all the laws affecting local governments, but I can't know the answer to every legal issue that comes up, and nor will I represent to you that I know an answer when I don't know for sure that I know it. So in those circumstances, I would advise the council to delay action until it can be researched and we can figure out the right course of action, because it's so important that these things get researched and thought out and fully vetted before the government takes action on them.
Okay.
Thank you. You had mentioned earlier that you had experience working at the state legislature. What in your background with that experience or other experience relates to the development of policies, ordinances, resolutions, bill draft reviews? Can you give us a little more information on your background in those areas?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor. In the 2013 session, I was policy assistant to the Assembly Majority Leader. In that role, I worked directly for the Assembly, and so I helped with researching bills before they were drafted, working on language. In that role, I would look at other state statutes. If there was a particular policy that the Majority Leader wanted to pursue, I would see if other states had pursued that policy and then look to their statutes and things that govern their conduct for examples on how Nevada's might look. Of course, in that role, I was not an attorney, and we had the wonderful staff at the Legislative Council Bureau who drafted the bills, but I would take those initial first steps at providing some example or model language to the Legislative Council Bureau. I also worked on drafting amendments, so in a couple of our hearings, we would have lobbyists or interest groups that would come and testify and have particular concerns with the language. I would meet with them afterward, discuss what their concerns were, look at the language to see how modifications might be made to address their issue, and then I would actually sometimes draft a mock-up amendment, drafting into the statute the proposed language that would meet their needs and was still amenable to our policy goal. And I'd meet the majority leader, present that. If he agreed, we'd present that to LCB again to do an official mock-up amendment, and then those would be passed in committee. And in doing that, I helped the majority leader pass 9 pieces of legislation that session. In 2017, after law school, I had clerked for the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada, and in that role, because of my legislative experience, there were some policy initiatives that they wanted to pursue, and they tasked me with drafting one of their major bill drafts. And so I drafted that bill for them, and then upon conclusion of that law clerkship, was offered a externship with Holland Hart for the legislative session, who's RTC's outside counsel. So I, in that role, continued to represent RTC and help shepherd that legislation, as well as 3 other bills for them to passage. And then in 2019, also working for Holland Hart, I represented several different clients, some renewable energy developers, which has been very helpful here for the solar energy leases that we enter into, as well as RTC again and some other local government clients. I think the most valuable thing that the legislative experience taught me that translates to this role is ordinance drafting. The process is very similar, although ordinances have more constitutional constraints, so there are those considerations whenever you're considering that policy initiative. You not only have to think of the constitutionality of it under the federal and state constitutions, but under Dillon rule and whether it's something that the cities have the authority to do. And of course, our charter, making sure that it comports with our charter. But otherwise, this process is very similar. You look at other jurisdictions for model language where you use principles of statutory drafting to draft these ordinances so that they're clear, concise, and understandable and enforceable. So that's the main, I think, takeaway that the legislative experience afforded me with in this role is ordinance drafting.
Thank you. Other questions? Councilmember Bridges?
Yes, actually 2. If I came to you and it was something you were not familiar with and you had to look it up and do research, and later on it came up again or someone had a similar question, would you have to look it up again? Or would you be able to recall or have familiarity with it still?
For the most part, once I research something, I tend to remember it very well, especially if I've written a memo on it, or, I wrote my student note on Reed versus Town of Gilbert, which is a U.S. constitutional case about sign ordinances and the enforceability of sign ordinances and how the First Amendment interplays with that. And just from writing that, I remember those rules and cases interpreting political or religious speech and also commercial speech, because that's a whole different scheme of constitutional law that applies, a different scrutiny, et cetera. So once I research something, I have a pretty good recall of it for the most part.
Okay, and the other is just a basic experience with airport issues and open meeting laws.
Well, prior to joining the city of Boulder City, I had very little aviation airport experience, but after joining the city of Boulder City, I've learned so much about aviation, the FAA, rules governing aviation. It's primarily federal, although local government does have some authority over our airport, but a lot of it, you do have to really be cognizant of those federal preemption and those things. So with that, I've learned a lot about aviation in that regard, regulations, things like that. But airport, the laws governing is very similar to other types of law. I mean, it's our city-owned land, so you have the real estate obligations that apply. If we're going to be offering land for lease, we have to get two appraisals, things like that, pursuant to NRS 268. That's not really different. Even though it's our airport, it's not really different than any other piece of city-owned property. As far as open meeting law, I had a lot of experience with open meeting law prior to coming to Boulder City. One, and through my representation of RTC, there was always several bills addressing open meeting law that we had to be cognizant of. While as a law clerk for RTC, I had to research a lot of issues affecting open meeting law. When you can go into closed session, when you can, what you have to do when you interview certain people, things like that. Those different areas are things that I'd already had written a lot of research memoranda on, working for the Regional Transportation Commission. So I was pretty well versed in open meeting law and those requirements, and when it's a deliberation, when it's an action, things like that, that would trigger open meeting law.
Other questions? Councilmember Hoskins?
Yes. Do you understand the importance of confidentiality? And if so, give us an example.
I do understand the importance of confidentiality, and I can't give you an example because it's confidential. That's a joke. That's just a joke. No, I think an example is understanding privilege, understanding that any communication that's in the furtherance of a legal service, that's a privileged communication. So under no circumstances could I ever reveal that conversation to anyone. The city is my client, and I, as attorney-client privilege, cannot waive privilege. Only my client can waive the privilege. Doesn't matter how benign the communication was, it's privileged. Attorney work product, knowing when things like that are confidential. And also, public records law is really important with confidentiality. There are certain things that are declared by statute to be confidential. So it's really important to know when those circumstances apply, because as a city attorney, you're not just representing, you're carrying out the public good, the goal in public records law of making sure that our books and records are open to the public. But we also have to be cognizant of individual privacy interests. Individuals have privacy interests, and they have torts and causes of action when those privacy interests are violated. So as a city attorney, you have to weigh and balance those interests. And of course, when there's a public need for disclosure and there's no law declaring it confidential, then it is open and subject to public records law. But making sure that you're aware when things are supposed to be confidential and you maintain that is also important as well.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Folda?
Thank you. Do you have anything that may come up in your background check that you would like to address head on?
No.
Any other questions? All right, well, we've asked you a lot of questions today. What questions do you have for us?
Mayor, normally I think I would have a lot of questions coming into a new job, but having served as your acting city attorney, a lot of my questions I already know the answer to, so I don't really have any questions for you at this time.
All right, thank you. Again, I do appreciate this. Having an interview in a public meeting can be somewhat stressful. I do appreciate you taking that challenge on and being here today to answer our questions. We will be making a decision here how we're going to proceed, And, we will hopefully be coming to a decision here in the next couple of weeks or so. Thank you. And again, at this time, we will go ahead and take another 20-minute recess while we complete our evaluations. We will reconvene at 4:30. Does anyone need additional time? We could use another 5 minutes if you need the time. All right, I will go ahead then and call the meeting back to order. We are now on to item B of the agenda, City Council direction regarding city attorney candidates. My suggestion at this time would be that we've completed the evaluation forms, that those be reviewed and processed by Ms. McKee to give us an overall scoring on the candidates. We do have a special meeting scheduled for the city manager attorneys on the 14th, and I would recommend adding an item to that meeting then to review the evaluations that have been completed and potentially make a decision at that time or have discussion regarding the candidates and the scoring that has been made at that time. Any other questions or comments, thoughts? Councilmember Adams?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just say as far as my thoughts on the process and today, certainly I think each candidate exhibited strengths that would be well suited for the city, and I'll certainly be going back and reviewing this again just to kind of listen again and take that opportunity to see just that and to start to navigate this process as we make this decision. But I'm certainly happy with the candidates that we did have before us today, and we'll be taking a lot of time to consider all of those various strengths and when who ultimately will be in the best position to put the city on the right foot moving forward.
What are your thoughts regarding the timeline to have a discussion on the 14th?
I think a week amount of time would be well. I've been here. Obviously, we've had a lot of time to review the resumes. We've now had this opportunity here to meet with the people and the candidates in a more face-to-face manner. So I would not be opposed to, at the very least, if having that discussion within a week and kind of seeing where we're all at, if we're ready to make a decision by that point, or if we at that time still think there's more time. I'm fairly open, but I'm certainly not opposed to having a conversation in a week.
Any other thoughts? Councilmember Hoskins?
I agree.
Anyone else? Councilmember Folda?
Just for discussion. So previously when, we had kind of talked about the timeline that we would, we narrowed down from the initial group to this group we have today. And then the next step would do possibly another narrowing down before the background step. So the 14 would be the narrowed down before background checks. Is that what you're saying?
Again, I think that's an opportunity we can discuss what the evaluations are.
Okay.
But I think we need to keep in mind that, we had narrowed the field from 8 to 5. 2 candidates chose to withdraw before, so we were already down to 3. So again, I think that looking at the evaluations and again have all of that analyzed, we may be able to make a decision on the 14th, but I don't think we have to make a decision on the 14th. But we are down to 3 candidates at this time. Councilmember Bridges, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would support leaving the option open to make a decision on the 14th, or if there are concerns about doing that, making that decision at the time. So I think it could go either way, depending on how closely each of us thinks any of the candidates are.
Okay. Ms. McKee, do you have any thoughts on a process like that?
No, Mayor. I mean, that sounds like it would work within your schedule and give me some time to accumulate those from you and put together a synopsis for you, if you will. And then I guess my only thought would be if we do not begin to do the background checks at this point, then you would probably be making an offer contingent upon that being done.
On the 14th?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so we would have that option then to either go forward with a candidate and the contingent on the background check and any other information, or depending on what the discussion is at that time, we could then reschedule something or schedule something else. Does that sound appropriate to you?
Correct. It takes us about 2 weeks to do the complete background and education verification.
All right, thank you. Again, any other thoughts or questions from council members? Mr. Bolt, any problems with that type of planning?
No problems at all with the 14th, perhaps a contingent job offer. And as I see it, I believe the contingencies would be a successful background evaluation. We also provide a physical. It's obviously not pass-fail, but we do give physicals. And then a contract, of course. That would be the contingency of negotiating that contract. So any job offer would be contingent on those.
All right, thank you. Again, any other thoughts or suggestions? Madam City Clerk, would you prefer a motion on that then? All right, I will make a motion to have the evaluations analyzed, an item scheduled for the meeting on April 14th, to provide direction on selection of the candidate.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, that motion carries. That then brings us to our last public comment period. Public comment at this time may be on any issue. Time limit again is 5 minutes, and as always, please be civil and concise in your comments. The number to call is 702-589-9629. Mr. Fan, please.
Good afternoon, Council, City staff. I'm just going to give my 2 cents worth. After listening to all 3 of the candidates speak and answer all your questions, it's just my opinion only. I don't know if it'll hold any sway or not, but I think that Ms. Walker seemed to, in my mind, she answered the questions the best, most concise, and with what needed to be. The other candidates are very good, don't get me wrong, I'm not bad-mouthing them or anything like that, but I think of the 3, I think she stands out, just my opinion. I know everybody's concerned about, she's only got 3 years of legal experience after law school. I remember when I was young, I remember applying for jobs. There were people applying for jobs that had 5 years, 10 years experience, and here I am, I got none. But somewhere along the line, somebody gave me a chance. Somebody gave you a chance, and you a chance, and you a chance. She only has 3 years, but she sounded a lot wiser to me than just 3 years of experience, for the job she's looking for. And the city has also had a great opportunity by her being our acting city attorney for however long it's been, a few months. As near as I can tell, the city hasn't fallen apart. We've not entered any weird lawsuits because the attorney did something silly or goofy. So, and I think everybody's had an opportunity to get to know her a little bit, chance to work with her. Again, I've never worked with her, don't know her, never even talked to her or anything like that. So, but you all have. So if I'm an employer, I'm going to look at that kind of stuff. And that kind of stuff, I think, holds a lot of weight. So those are just my thoughts and my opinions. I know it's a tough decision for all of you. I hope you make the right decision. I hope you make the best decision for the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. DeShane?
Perfect, thank you.
Judy DeShane. I would just hope that now that you guys have gotten this far in the hiring process and whatever, and I think you've done a good job up to this point. Now I'll wait and see who you hire before I'll say anything more about that. But I do hope that all 5 of you are seriously considering what's going to go into that employment contract. The last one we had for the last 2 from the city manager and city attorney prior were just plain crap, and they did nothing to protect the city, Boulder City. And I would certainly hope you guys will correct those oversights and that you are thinking about it at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam City Clerk, is the phone line available now? It is. Okay. So again, anyone wishing to call in for the final public comment period, the phone number is 702-589-9629. Again, this is our final public comment period for the special meeting of the City Council. Comment may be on any issue at this time. The phone number is 702-589-9629. Madam City Clerk, did we have any written emails or voicemails?
No further comments were offered.
Thank you. And this is our final public comment period. The phone number 702-589-9629. All right, hearing no others for public comment, we will close the final public comment period. Again, thank you to staff and everyone. We are adjourned.